Since the outbreak of war in 1775, the northern colonies had become the epicenter of the fighting. The North had long been a hotbed of revolution, with cities like Boston being long-standing centers of resistance against British rule. In an attempt to destroy the revolution where it was best supported, the British focused much of their efforts in New England. But by 1778, the two sides are at a stalemate, and the British are looking for a way to turn the tide. The southern colonies are very different from their northern neighbours. Their economies revolve predominantly around agriculture, with a plantation system cultivating cash crops like tobacco and rice, requiring vast tracts of land and a large labour force to work the fields. The population of the colonies is spread relatively evenly, with the total black and white population at over 2.1 million by the 1770s. But almost 90% of slaves reside in the South, making up close to half its population. Slavery is critical to the southern economies, with the profitability of plantations dependent on the practice. To maintain the delicate stability of the system and guard against the threat of slave revolts, many southern leaders, both patriot and loyalist, are cautious to fully mobilize for war. But fighting has persisted nonetheless. In Virginia, the royal governor, Lord Dunmore, planned to resist at the outbreak of war. His proclamation in 1775 dramatically raises the stakes in the colony. He offers freedom to slaves who leave their masters and join the British Army, proclaims martial law, and brands anyone who does not take up arms for the king a traitor. Dunmore's proclamation leaves little room for compromise and strongly contradicts what Virginians consider to be their most basic rights. Lord Dunmore raises loyalist militias and a regiment of former slaves, but his proclamation had, by and large, infuriated Virginians, and in late 1775, the British forces are routed at the Battle of Great Bridge and swiftly expelled from the colony. In the Carolinas, without the presence of British regular forces, both sides race to raise local militias. Patriots dominate the towns and Loyalists the backcountry. In February 76, the two forces finally meet, and the fate of the colony is decided by a Highland charge of sword-wielding Scottish settlers against dug-in Patriot forces. The Loyalists are decimated in the battle by accurate musket fire, and the defeat leads to the capture of close to 1,000 Loyalists and the mass arrest of their leadership. The British face similar setbacks in Georgia, where the royal governor, James Wright, is forced to flee in March 1776. The only place where the British are able to hold on is Florida, where a number of continental expeditions sent to capture St. Augustine are repelled. The town quickly overflows with Loyalist refugees fleeing the Carolinas and Georgia, who avidly burn effigies of revolutionary leaders like Sam Adams and John Hancock in the city centre. But for the rest of the South, for the first 3 years of the war, the British would leave the colonies almost entirely uncontested and in the hands of Patriot forces. Despite many Loyalists feeling betrayed by the lack of action, support for the king remains in the South, particularly in rural communities. And General Clinton now plans to use this support as he moves to break the deadlock in the war. When war broke out at Lexington in 1775, many American colonists faced a stark choice. This was not simply a war against the British, but a civil war between Americans. And before independence could be achieved, those loyal to the crown would also have to be defeated. The resulting war would divide families, shatter communities, and create deep ideological rifts that would reshape the future of a nation and the world. Civil wars, by their nature, are often more brutal than wars between nations. Cycles of revenge and retaliation escalate and fuel the violence. and the American Revolution would be no different, with some of the bloodiest battles of the war being fought between American-only units. Across the 13 colonies, individuals had to consider their core beliefs. By choosing a side, are you defending your country or taking up arms against it? Loyalism cut across social, racial, and ideological lines in the 13 colonies. Some felt a strong allegiance to king and country, while others were more pragmatic and considered their own self-interest and self-preservation in a tumultuous war. But few had a blind allegiance to Britain. Most Loyalists still cherished their rights and yearned for the political representation afforded to them as Englishmen. Loyalists often shared the very same grievances as their patriot countrymen against Parliament in London. But when war finally came, they ultimately chose a different side. Historians estimate that between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 colonists remained loyal, and during the war, up to 50,000 Americans fought in Loyalist militias, provincial regiments, or directly in the British Army. A further 20,000 slaves fought for the British, including slaves owned by Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, along with well over 10,000 Indians. But why did they fight, and what happened to them after the war? From the outset of the conflict, British military planners understood that the small and globally stretched British Army would need large-scale Loyalist support to defeat the rebellion. Efforts to recruit Loyalists partly relied on appeals to emotion, love for your country, nostalgia for British roots, and the stability of the current government and rule of law. But material self-interest also played its part. Offers of financial bounties for joining were common, and more importantly, generous land grants were offered to new recruits. Many that signed up were landless labourers, sons of farmers, or recent immigrants, and the offer of land in the 13 colonies, once the war was won, became an enticing offer. There were also significant risks. To raise funds and weaken Loyalist support, Patriot forces and revolutionary governments engaged in widespread confiscation of Loyalist property. The British Army also had a poor reputation for capturing territory, raising Loyalist forces, and then quickly abandoning the area, leaving entire families to face retribution from Patriots. As the war progressed, many tens of thousands of men, women, and children on both sides moved to get behind friendly lines to escape persecution. For the Loyalists, hubs primarily revolved around New York in the north and St. Augustine in the south. For the 20,000 runaway slaves who joined the Loyalist cause, or the 5,000 that joined the Patriots, the risks were far more stark. Leaving a plantation was extremely dangerous, and little quarter could be expected if captured after a battle. For those brave enough to leave their masters, the choice of who to join was simple: which side offered the most promising route to freedom. The majority of Loyalists who signed up to fight were organised into provincial regiments. These units were often trained and equipped similarly to the British Army and included formations like the Loyal American Rangers, the Royal Regiment of New York, and the King's American Dragoons. They participated in major campaigns alongside British forces and often acted as light infantry, combating Patriot irregular forces and their guerrilla tactics. For men captured on both sides, it was common to switch allegiances, sometimes more than once, rather than face an internment camp, prison ship, or worse. And after a battle, it was not uncommon for entire local militias to switch sides, as happened in New York after the British arrival. After the war ended, 100,000 Americans would leave the new country, representing close to 5% of the pre-war population. These Americans travelled far and wide and received financial compensation, land, and supplies in an empire-wide program for refugees. A small number moved to Britain, but most left for new beginnings in other colonies like Nova Scotia and the Caribbean. Some Loyalists found themselves in the employment of the East India Company as new colonists in Australia, or for some black Loyalists, settlers of a new African colony of former slaves in Freetown, Sierra Leone. These men and women brought American ways of thinking that spread with them across the empire. That often included a strong sense of their rights, a disdain for imperial authority, and demands for political representation. The war had been damaging for the British, and it marked the start of a transition from a commercial Atlantic empire to a new beginning in Asia. That recovery was in large part supported by American loyalists, who advocated expansion and helped rebuild the empire in a new image, with liberal ideas that stood as a strong alternative to the new Republican movements growing in France and across the Americas. In the end, the fate of many of the Loyalists mirrored that of the empire itself. After the misery of civil war, global success and international preeminence lay on the horizon. In late 1778, General Clinton is considering his options for the war, following the inconclusive battles of Monmouth and Rhode Island in the previous months. He has some 29,000 men in New York and is under increasing pressure from his political masters in London to open a new front in the south. It is widely believed that Loyalists are quietly waiting for an opportunity to rise up against the rebels in the southern states, and the arrival of British troops would quickly collapse continental control. By November 78, Clinton is ready to send a force of 3,000 men south. 1 British, 2 Hessian, and 4 Loyalist regiments are dispatched with the mission of capturing Savannah and returning Georgia to British rule. Further north lay the true prize, capturing the city of Charlestown in the more populous South Carolina. The British force is led by the capable Scotsman, Lieutenant Colonel Campbell, and they arrive near the mouth of the Savannah River on the 23rd of December. They are opposed by 850 Continental regulars and militia who attempt to hold the British back outside of the city. During the engagement, the British flank the Continental force, causing a rout. In the aftermath, Savannah is quickly captured, and in the following days, the countryside falls to British forces. Local Loyalists quickly begin a revenge campaign, burning Patriot farms and plantations. By mid-January, several thousand British reinforcements arrive from Florida under the command of the Anglo-Swiss general Augustin Prevost, who assumes command of British forces in the south. Campbell is soon sent north and captures Augusta in late January, the seat of the Patriot government in Georgia. With the rapid British advances, Loyalists begin turning out in large numbers, and over 1,000 men are enrolled in Augusta alone. For the British command, the southern strategy appears to be working, with more and more militias forming to join their campaign. In South Carolina, a wealthy landowner, Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd, has been raising a Loyalist militia of some 800 men to march to Augusta and join the British. But the Continentals have not been passive since the disaster at Savannah. The Continental Army commander in the South, Major General Benjamin Lincoln, has been raising forces of his own. One such Patriot militia, under the command of another South Carolinian landowner, Colonel Andrew Pickens, has been carefully tracking Boyd and his men as they move south into Georgia. On the morning of the 14th of February, the Loyalist camp is quiet. Now in friendlier territory, the horses are loose grazing, and few pickets have been posted. The British flag is raised for the first time since entering Georgia, and drums beat. But at 10 a.m., the situation is about to rapidly change. Colonel Pickens has some 400 Patriot militiamen and advances from the high ground towards the camp. Although they are outnumbered almost 2-1, the Patriots have the element of surprise on their side. As they approach, musket fire is exchanged with Loyalist sentries, which alerts the rest of the camp to the danger. Boyd quickly assembles 100 picked men and scrambles to a makeshift defensive line against a fence to meet their oncoming countrymen. The militias exchange fire in the centre, with both sides holding their own in the struggle. In the smoke and chaos, neither side gives way until the Loyalist leader Boyd is hit and falls mortally wounded to the ground. Panic soon spreads, and the Loyalists retreat back to their main defensive line, abandoning their horses and baggage in the process. Pickens has sent part of his force through swamps to flank either side of the camp, but the Loyalists had crossed the river, and despite the shock of battle and losing their commander, they were now reforming on a hill. Without wasting time, Pickens' men begin charging across the river while under fire to attack the hill from 3 sides. The fighting continues for almost an hour, but assaulted from multiple directions, the Loyalists eventually break and disperse into the surrounding countryside. As the firing dies down, Pickens finds Boyd dying on the field. The two had known each other before the war in South Carolina, and Pickens quickly calls for medical treatment. The two men talk about the battle like old friends, and Boyd gives Pickens a letter for his wife, which he would deliver following Boyd's death only hours later. The battle had been costly for the Loyalists, who suffered 70 dead and another 75 captured. Although 270 of them would eventually join up with the British, hundreds more would go home and to the mercy of Patriot authorities. More importantly, the battle severely dampens Loyalist recruitment efforts across the South, highlighting again the inability of the British to protect locally raised troops. In Augusta, Campbell has been hearing reports of approaching Continental forces. On the 14th of February, he abandons the town and begins to retreat south. But the British keep an eye on the Continentals and strike out at the Battle of Briar Creek on March 3rd, almost smashing the entire Continental force. The battle causes a large number of Patriot militiamen to go home in turn. But despite the victory, Augusta and much of the backcountry fall back into Continental hands. By June, General Lincoln has regrouped his forces and now has some 2,000 men ready to march from Charlestown. But to recapture Savannah, he would need naval assistance. Fortunately for Lincoln, French Admiral Estaing is on hand with a large fleet and 4,000 troops. The French admiral had spent the first half of the year attacking and capturing British possessions in the Caribbean, but he was now back to assist the Continentals in the south. By September, the Allies are ready, and both Lincoln and Estaing move against Savannah. The city, consisting of some 450 houses, sits on hills above the river. The British, using slave labour, have built extensive defensive works outside of the city and have almost 5,000 men defending it. They have also scuttled ships to limit French naval access as much as possible. In early October, the bombardment of the city begins. Although a majority of Savannah's buildings are damaged, the British defences remain intact. When the British failed to surrender, Estaing, who was eager to end the siege quickly due to disease spreading on his ships, next plans an assault. On the evening of October 8th, Estaing and Lincoln issue orders for the Allied attack. They plan for a feint on their left, while French and American columns strike against British redoubts on the right. Redoubts that are thought to be poorly defended before clearing the then breached defensive works to the river. But the British have been informed of the Allied plan. A sergeant major in the Continental Army deserts to the British after receiving Lincoln's orders and tells General Prevost of the Franco-American attack. Later that morning at 4 a.m, the Allied assault begins. A dense morning fog covers the battlefield, limiting communication and confusing the advancing Allies. The feint on the left does its job and holds down British troops, while the French in the centre attack Loyalists from North Carolina but struggle to make progress. On the right and the main attack, French columns in their white uniforms are slowed down by swamps and their formations begin to lose cohesion. The main target for the Allies is a major British redoubt on the right, now garrisoned by Scotsmen and Loyalist militias. In bloody trench-to-trench fighting, some French units make good progress as the assaults intensify. But casualties are starting to mount, with dozens of Frenchmen being cut down by grape shot and accurate American rifle fire. To the left of the French, the first Continental wave against the main British redoubt makes equally good progress, and their flag is hoisted on the exterior slopes. But in dogged fighting, the British are still able to hang on, eventually driving the assault back. A second continental wave moves forward, but following orders from the French, they move too far left and find themselves stuck on swampy ground and under torrential cannon fire. As the fighting rages across the fortifications, Count Pulaski, in charge of the Continental Cavalry, takes 200 of his horsemen forward. The cavalry begin to charge at full speed and attempt to bypass the British defences and storm deep into the city. But despite the cavalry's bravery, enfilade fire from British positions starts to devastate their ranks. Count Pulaski is hit by grape-shot fire and falls mortally wounded. His men soon abandon the attack and carry their dying commander back to friendly lines. With this final failure, Astan, wounded twice himself in the arm and leg, calls off the assault. The battle has been costly and a disaster for the Franco-American cause. Almost 900 men are lost, with hundreds of bodies piled up across Savannah's defensive works. The next day, despite pleas from Lincoln to continue the siege, Astan has had enough and decides to withdraw to his ships and then the safety of the Caribbean. After the battle, a stalemate in Georgia resumes. The Continentals retreat north to Augusta and Charlestown, while the British begin a program of re-establishing civil administration. James Wright returns as the royal governor, along with new judges, magistrates, and pro-British civil leaders. Far further north, Washington has been pursuing a Fabian strategy against British General Clinton's main army and refusing to give battle. Instead, both sides have been conducting guerrilla warfare and raids, the British against coastal towns and the Continentals against Britain's Indian allies. By the end of 1779, Clinton, frustrated by a lack of progress and inspired by the victory at Savannah, now decides to shift the focus of his operations to the south. In late December, Clinton and his second-in-command, Cornwallis, leave New York with 8,500 men. For control of the southern colonies, the great prize remains in Charlestown in South Carolina. The city is the largest in the South, with a major port and easy access to the surrounding colonies. For Clinton in early 1780, desperate to retake the initiative in the war, the city is now his target. By mid-February, the British land 30 miles south of Charlestown and begin their advance on the city. Continental General Lincoln remains in command, and he has been building defences in the city and the surrounding forts. But his force is too poorly trained and equipped to attempt to proactively attack the British on their approach, like Washington had done in Philadelphia 3 years earlier. Although some urge him to abandon the city while he still can, Lincoln is also under considerable political pressure to hold and prevent the British gaining a critical base in the south. Charlestown is situated on a peninsula, making it appearingly naturally defendable. But to a foe with a large navy, Charlestown is also vulnerable, with those same natural defences working against it. Lincoln expects the main attack to come from land and has slaves build lines of trenches and redoubts across the neck. While the Continentals continue to prepare for a siege, the British slowly tighten the noose around the city. Throughout the siege, South Carolinian Loyalist dragoons, under the command of the infamous Banastre Tarleton, will defeat a number of Patriot forces lingering outside the city with ruthless efficiency. The Royal Navy, although receiving damage from cannon fire at Fort Moultrie, enters the inner harbour on the 8th of April. At the same time, British siege works are also completed and the cannonade starts against the city and its defences. Firebombs and red-hot shots are purposefully used by the British, quickly causing fires to spread. An informal fire brigade is organised in the city, while citizens seek protection in their cellars. British siege works creep closer and closer, and by the 19th of April, they are only 250 yards away from the main defensive line. Lincoln attempts limited sorties to attack British positions, but these are poorly coordinated and easily repulsed. As days pass, the situation becomes more and more dire for the defenders. Lincoln, under pressure from civil leaders and his Council of War, soon begins to consider his options. But evacuation is now impossible due to a lack of boats and the presence of British shore batteries and the Royal Navy. There is also no sign of a relief force coming, leaving him in an increasingly difficult position. Despite a good start, all was not well in the British camp. General Cornwallis, frustrated that he himself is not in overall command, has been increasingly hostile to Clinton and now refuses to cooperate altogether. Cornwallis and Clinton have very different strategies for the war. Clinton favouring a more defensive approach to hold key cities and territory, while Cornwallis favours offensive operations to subdue the countryside. Much to Clinton's anger, he eventually gives in to Cornwallis's requests for a separate, independent command. To tighten the screws further, Cornwallis moves to take surrounding fortifications in late April. On the main line of contact, the British taunt the garrison by firing shots of rice and sugar over the defences. With the army's rations already having to be cut, morale begins to plummet. The final fort outside of the city is captured in early May, all while Charlestown is pounded by British batteries. Many in General Lincoln's Council of War had been urging him to surrender the city, and on May 10th, a petition is sent to Lincoln from both the militia and citizens of Charlestown asking him to capitulate. With supplies running low and no prospect of reinforcements or escape, the next day a white flag is hoisted on the outer works. After just 6 weeks of resistance, the siege of Charlestown is over. The battle has been a staggering defeat for the Patriot cause, with 5,500 men captured. Worse still, despite Lincoln attempting to negotiate for better terms, the British demand only total surrender. Traditionally, a defeated army is granted the honours of war, allowing them to surrender with flags flying, drums beating, and their weapons in hand. Clinton was in no mood to grant these terms, however, and the Continentals are forced to lay down their arms and surrender unconditionally, an act widely seen as a mark of disgrace for an army. Although militiamen and officers are for the most part paroled, for many Continental troops, the notoriously harsh conditions of prison ships now awaited them. Clinton had finally achieved the decisive victory he had sought in New York, but his success was also down to Continental failings. Lincoln had been unwilling to abandon a position of serious disadvantage, and worse still, he had conducted a lackluster defense of it. He had harboured unrealistic expectations of relief and ultimately allowed pressure from civilians to guide his decision-making. After the battle, there are almost no substantial Continental forces left in the South, and the British begin consolidating their grip on Georgia while rapidly expanding their control in South Carolina. Patriot support is now at its lowest in the southern colonies, and the British appear poised for sweeping gains. The gamble south, so far, seemed to be working for General Clinton, but both partisan and Continental forces are massing around him, and they have no intention of letting the recent defeats go unanswered. Thank you for watching our series on the American Revolution, and of course, a huge thanks as well to our Patreon and YouTube supporters. Join now to get early access and vote on future videos. Thanks again, and until next time.